Um, all right, I've got a go ahead, and we are at the midpoint, so we're gonna get started. All right.
Okay.
Any last questions before we get started?
No, I think I'm ready.
Awesome. Forward to our chat. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna kind of shut down for a little bit, get a few things ready before we officially. All right, so I will see you on the other side.
Okay.
Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode.
Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Lindsay Halleck. Lindsay is the Director of Public and Environmental Policy at Cape Fear Public Utility Authority, where she and her team help the organization plan for the long-term impacts of environmental challenges and public policy developments. Prior to her work with the utility, she was a policy associate at Frontier Group, a research organization dedicated to building support for clean energy, climate change adaptation, and government transparency. Lindsay will share how water utilities in North Carolina are already feeling climate impacts. She discusses how stronger partnerships between water utilities, researchers, and urban planners could be mutually beneficial and how utilities can make a better case for investing in climate adaptation. Hey, Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Hi, Doug. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, I am here to talk water utilities with you, so I'm very excited. This is probably one of the first that I've done this way, and you're in Cape Fear too, very cool name. But let's just start off. What is the Cape Fear Water Utility Authority? What do you do there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are a water and a wastewater utility. We're located in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is in coastal southeastern North Carolina. So we're kind of sandwiched between the Cape Fear River and the Atlantic Ocean. We serve about 200,000 people, businesses and homes, and we are the biggest water and wastewater provider in our area. And so we don't do stormwater. We just really focus on water and wastewater.
Okay, so you're there talking policy. I mean, this is water. You're providing water resources and everything, but you do policy. So what does that mean? You must have, you're kind of looking out at the future. How does that kind of factor into what the authority does?
Yeah, so my group is a pretty new group, actually. We were kind of founded in the last 3 years when the authority really kind of got hit with a couple of different environmental hazards and issues. And so most of my group works on environmental work. We look at source water protection. We take water from the river. We also take water from aquifers under New Hanover County. So we look at kind of what different legislation could be impacting those sources. We look at different policies internally, how we can do our jobs better to be better for the environment. We also look at social policy. So my team is really involved with affordability, which actually is related to climate adaptation, especially when we talk about big investments. So we're looking kind of how legislation will impact us and then what we can kind of ask for from our partners, from state, local government, that would help us do our work better.
So I'm assuming it's a scale thing. The more people, the more options that you have. But the fact that they even have your team there kind of looking at these things, probably not all water utilities have this luxury, right? I mean, what's the case?
Yeah, I think we're pretty unique. A lot of times water utilities might be part of a city government, which could have resources like this, but we are a standalone water utility. And I think that, our group isn't that common yet, but I think you'll start to see more positions like mine pop up as the environmental impacts and impacts from climate change start to affect cities and water utilities in particular, kind of more obviously.
Okay, so you've started the conversation around climate change at the utility, right? I mean, tell me about that process. It's not necessarily easy, right?
I think it would have been a lot more difficult if we weren't kind of already talking about a lot of environmental things. So what kind of started was we're on the Cape Fear River. Most of our water comes from the Cape Fear River. We did find out that DuPont, kind of upstream, had been releasing chemicals into the river that was found in our drinking water. So our treatment plant couldn't get them out. And that really started a big conversation in our community about the environment, about the health of the source water that we rely on for economic growth, for public health, for recreation. And so as that was happening and that issue was kind of playing itself out, we got hit by Hurricane Florence, which was the second 500-year storm that our community had been hit by in 2 years. So, and that was a huge storm, not how strong the winds were, but by the amount of rain that we got. We were so flooded that we were completely disconnected from the rest of North Carolina for about a week. We had to fly in and materials we had to bring in from ships. So it was a big wake-up call for the community about what a future with stronger and sort of more rain-heavy storms might look like and how we might be impacted. And I think that suddenly made the climate change conversation just a lot easier. And it was just sort of normal to start talking about it. And we just kind of went with that as a utility and started bringing up the conversation internally as well.
All right, so you just described some flooding, but you're so close to the coast. Is coastal flooding the biggest threat, or do you have a lot of upstream flooding? Is that something you have to worry about a lot?
So that's kind of a project we're working on right now. We're actually looking at some of our more vulnerable assets, which are pump stations. Because we're coastal, we rely on 150 pump stations to bring wastewater from town to our plants. And we're looking right now at, are those pump stations in flood zones? If they're in flood zones, how vulnerable are they? And we're looking at different sea level rise scenarios. So what we're finding is that the majority of the flooding we're concerned about is storm surge, but also stormwater. It's just, the stormwater when it hits the station isn't draining like it should. So we're going to be impacted by stronger storms, certainly, but also just the intense precipitation events that they expect will come as the climate continues to change. And so those will be two different strategies that we have to think through as we, work on our assets and get them ready.
Okay, what about sea level rise? I mean, you have flooding events, but like long-term sea level rise, I'm sure on paper you're worried about it, but is it something that you're addressing right now?
Yes, that's absolutely something we're worried about. So if you look at a map of New Hanover County, we have the river and then we have the ocean. And then in between, we have a lot of creeks that kind of cross through. Those are tidal creeks. So as sea level rise continues to happen, what we'll see is that the tides and the high tides are going to get a lot higher and start threatening some of our assets, or maybe not the assets themselves, but sort of access to the assets, like with roads and maybe, crews couldn't get in if something happened. So we're absolutely starting to sort of work with our partners in the county and at the city and map some of what we expect might happen and where we might be most vulnerable.
Okay, so you have your users who pay rates and such, but how are you going to quantify the impacts of climate change? You look at these different areas. I mean, that must be like what you have to kind of concentrate on. How are these going to increase the cost and such? How do you do that? What's the process?
So we're working on that right now. And I think that if I had a sort of wish list of, research opportunities with any researchers out there, that is really where I'm looking, is trying to get into the economics of this. So how do we sort of calculate those avoided costs and compare that with the investments? One of the things that we're doing right now is they kind of recently did a full scale look at how much Florence cost. So what I'm interested in doing is going back where our biggest damage was. What if we had put in some of these adaptation measures? How much would they have saved us? And try to kind of look into the past for some of that. But we're also reading, the newest research. We're following, people who are doing this work, and we're trying to learn from maybe what other people are doing, or what some of the academics are working on. And we're also, thinking about, okay, we know that we're gonna have to pay more, right? The storms are gonna get more expensive. We're gonna have to start investing in some adaptation measures. If we have customers who are saying, look, it's just too risky to live on the coast anymore, or, in certain neighborhoods become too expensive because of insurance requirements. Are we going to have the same amount of revenue that we've had historically? And what does that mean for some of these investments? And how do the finances work? So that's something that we're looking at as well. How would we be impacted by like a different mortgage landscape and that kind of thing?
It looks like you're studying it and you want to, I guess, talk to experts around this, but are you familiar with any water utilities that you can sort of tie directly that the water rates increase because they're factoring in, adaptation costs? Are you seeing any of that yet in other utilities?
I haven't seen any of that with other utilities, but if there are some, I would love to hear from them. We're looking, so right now we, because of the contamination issue that I mentioned earlier in the Cape Fear River, we're actually having to upgrade our water plant right now. And that's a $40 million upgrade for us to be able to treat PFAS chemicals. And that will translate to about a $5 increase on an average bill. So if we look at something like that, you can kind of see, we're a standalone water utility. We don't get tax dollars. All of our money almost comes from our ratepayers. And so if we're going to start making large investments like that, it is going to impact rates in some way. And how do we do that in a way that's equitable? How do we do that in a way that considers affordability and have that conversation with our customers? What is important to you? And how do we pay for this over the long term?
Okay, I guess I wasn't clear. So you're a private entity. You're not a public, government entity.
We are. So we're a public government entity, and they actually we're a utility authority, which means that we're governmental, we're nonprofit, but we're completely separate from the city and the county, and we only focus on water and wastewater. So it's a really interesting setup that I think is really helpful because we only focus, we're only looking at water and wastewater. And so we're not having to kind of compete with other budgetary priorities. But we do rely only on ratepayers, and we do get some grants. There's some low interest loans, but the majority of our funding comes from the bills that people pay.
Well, I'm sure just with any entity, rate increases are just, all right, if we really have to do this. But if you're not connected to the city, who ultimately is it just you do have a governing commission? Are there any elected officials who are involved in this process?
Yeah, so we have a board, and it's an 11-member board. So 2 members have to be from the city council, 2 have to be from the county commission, and then they jointly appoint the other 7, which are all private citizens. And so that's a board, and they're, we have meetings every month, and we bring items to them, and they help us guide, the direction that they think the system and staff should be going in.
All right, so I want to get to this notion of investing in adaptation. It's what you're probably doing a lot of your research on, and what you're probably going to have to argue in front of that commission going forward, right? That's a conversation you're probably going to have to revisit many times. But I'm wondering, you have extreme storm events, and those are in your face. People can kind of relate to those because they experience those things, and you could tie that to climate change. But then there's also we have long-term sea level rise. We have these other future impacts of climate change. How are you getting your head around, I guess, communicating those different threats? Because people can probably relate much more to those extreme storm events versus but you're still tying those as climate change impacts, if that makes sense. Because both of those are climate change investments, but one has a certain urgency.
Yeah, so one of the things that we just recently did, which I'm really excited about, is we started a climate resiliency working group, and that's internal to the organization. And so we have representatives from most of the different departments. And really what our goal is to sort of identify what are we doing now to prepare for all of the threats. So not just the big storm events, which we're pretty well prepared for being on the coast. We can always improve, but that's really the first thing that we got down. We're looking at increased temperatures. What does that mean for employee safety? We're looking at, even drought periods. We have drought periods here. What does that mean? Increased, precipitation events, nuisance flooding, all the things that we know, we can expect to hit southeastern North Carolina. And right now we're inventorying all the different things we're doing in the different departments. And my hope is that inventory will allow this group to move forward in identifying needs. And then as we do that, projects will come from those needs. And we can either pay for them through our normal operating budget, or we'll integrate them into our capital improvement process, which, brings a lot of different projects to the board every year. And so my hope is that we'll start to mainstream climate planning into our regular funding and budgetary process. And that way they'll kind of always be considered with each new project that we do.
All right, so I have a question from Ken in the community room, and you sort of answered it with regarding this working group, but he asks, what types of community or regional coalitions do you lead or participate in?
Yeah, so internally we have this new working group. We also are represented on the City of Wilmington's Clean Energy Task Force, which is really about like mitigation and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions as a community. I'm a member of the American Planning Association, and they're doing a lot of work on climate change adaptation. And planners are trying to get together on, what are you doing there? What are you doing here? And sort of networking around that. That's been a huge resource to me. And then we were also part of the North Carolina risk and resiliency planning process. So Governor Cooper has done a great job bringing climate change in North Carolina to the forefront. And we were part of those stakeholder meetings when they were asking different industries, water, agriculture, all the different groups that might be impacted, and kind of trying to get an idea of what we need at the local level. So we were really involved with that process and sort of networking with our state officials as well.
Okay, another question from room. Here's from Mike. How much of an impact do private investors have on your infrastructure plans for the future of Wilmington?
That's a good question. I mean, certainly, as we move forward in planning, we will need to talk about how this impacts our sort of asset design standards. Sometimes when a new community is being built, for example, a developer will be responsible for building the assets that ultimately get conveyed to us. We have a lot, we work hand in hand with developers when new communities come online. And so we are having that conversation of, how much will these things cost in the future? How will that affect the cost of developing in New Hanover County, and really working to understand how those costs get passed on through the community. So, sometimes the authority pays for the assets, and sometimes the developer does. And that's part of each sort of project negotiation.
All right, so this notion of partnering more with researchers, because there's all these different areas that you're trying to explore, but you just might not have the staff resources to do that. Tell us about this process. Are you North Carolina has some great universities. I'm sure there's a lot of great coastal work being done. What's your, plan of attack there in regards to outreach to researchers?
Yeah, so we recently formed a couple of really great relationships with some of the professors at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. They have great programs related to sort of coastal policy and the science of climate change. So I'm really excited about that and sort of continuing our work with them. I watch a lot of Simpatico and planning to kind of reach out to any researchers that I see that come out there. And just trying to keep my eye out and ear out, for anyone who might be interested in working with the water industry, and see, what's happening. So that's a place that I really want to explore in the next, couple of years. How can we increase our partnerships with the academic community and sort of right size? How can they get the data that they want from us? And how can we sort of lean on them with some of their skills and their knowledge that we just don't have?
Well, with professors working in these areas, when you can sort of co-fund a graduate student, maybe there's some options there. I'm not sure how much of a budget you have, but you get an on-site graduate student kind of working in the areas that you want, and then it funds that through universities. So they're always looking for that too. It's like,
yeah. And one of the things we've been doing, especially in my department, we're a small department. We have 3 people, myself and 2 others. So we've pretty much now constantly had an intern from the local university. I'm really proud to say that we've been able to pay that intern and give academic credit. And so we've been really relying on interns to do a lot of our more exciting work. They have the skill set, they have the technical knowledge, and they're usually excited about environmental issues. So that's been a really fun opportunity that we've been able to take advantage of, for sure. And I think it's giving them good experience and hopefully sort of exposing them to the public sector and seeing that as a future, potential job opportunity.
Well, you'd mentioned that some of the resources you get are from, planner. Are you actually a planner? You're an urban planner. Is that your background?
So I don't know if you would say that's my background, but that's certainly a lot of what I do here. And then, I recently became a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. So now I'm involved, whether they like me or not.
And we had this in a previous conversation too, but the American Planning Association is, they're getting more interested in this topic of adaptation. And so how does that manifest itself? Is it just through, various kind of committees? Are they putting on webinars? How is that like a resource to you through that association?
Yeah, so they have so many resources. They have great sort of, they call them, PAS reports, just great research reports. They have several good ones on water in particular. Um, they have the planning magazine that comes out with, usually it's reviewing recent articles that came out or just kind of bring up different trends. So that's really helpful because I find that, even though I'm in the water and wastewater industry, it's really helpful for me to know about, what's going on in housing, what's going on in urban design, and how is that going to impact, the way that our assets are spread out around town. What happens with planning in floodplains? Because if there's going to be a house in a floodplain, pretty much we're going to have to deliver water there, and how would that work? So they have webinars, they have conferences. We just had the virtual policy conference where I learned a lot. So they've been great. And they also have like the water network, I just realized and found out about, where it's really a group of planners only focused on water. So that's been an awesome resource as well. So I definitely recommend, checking out some of their resources. I just think they're really educational, and they're really starting to focus on climate change.
Well, I mean, so you've mentioned some great research. You look at Simpatico too. We appreciate that you find that some value in there, and the Planning Association. And you have a team of 3. I'm just curious too, like the people that are part of your team. Is there that adaptation background? Are people kind of bringing that, or are they kind of getting exposed now that they've started with you? How does that all work? Because people are still emerging as a topic to study or to even work in.
Yeah, so both of them are, fairly recent graduates, Aaron and Sarah. Sarah comes with a GIS background, which has been really helpful in mapping and knowing where our assets are and kind of understanding like flood modeling. And then Aaron also comes from an environmental science background and a policy background. So, when I asked the universities, are you guys doing adaptation sort of certificates or adaptation classes? I think they're all thinking about it. I'm not sure if it's really, gelled yet in a lot of places. But I do find that, the younger generations especially just have more exposure to that, just, by being interested in the environment and kind of listening around. But I think we're all 3 of us are really learning as we go, and trying to, soak up all the experience from others that we can, and learn from everyone else who's kind of working on this beside us.
All right, so I have one more question, and from the community room, and then we're at the end of the episode. It just flew by. And from Mike again is, what is the biggest roadblock to increasing these partnerships, and what needs to change to overcome it?
That's a great question. What's the biggest roadblock? I think just knowing who's out there, right? Like sometimes you just don't know what people are working on. You don't know if they're interested, and just making that connection is hard. All the time I find someone new in Wilmington, I'm like, wait, you're working on that? I had no idea. So I think building networks where people can share just, hey, here's what I'm working on. What are you working on? I think that's going to lead to a lot of moments of like, oh, great. Like, let's leverage our resources on that. Let's partner up for this grant together. So just talking about what you're doing, I think is important, because then you're going to find others as well. But I also think people are busy. People have a lot going on, and it's hard to, it's just hard to fit into people's schedules sometimes, or hard to add one more thing to your plate. So hopefully doing things like this, I'll find people who just kind of naturally have the same interest, and we can work together.
All right, so I guess final question. So what's next for you? What's going to keep you busy over the next 3-6 months?
So we are working, like I said, on that resiliency inventory, just trying to identify where are we already doing well, where, what have we already done regarding resiliency? And then hopefully from that, we bring that to the board, and hopefully they give us the approval to move forward with, identifying some of the gaps, and trying to dream up some projects, hopefully find some grant funding for some of those, and then work with our team to figure out how we can start thinking about climate change as a part of the capital improvement process. So yeah, I think that's the next steps.
Well, awesome. And I'm glad you're poking around in Simpatico quite a bit, and I hope you see it as a resource, especially with this resiliency group. Maybe there's an opportunity, using it as a platform as you guys have those conversations. And definitely when it comes to your engagement with the Planning Association, and we did chat about that before, but just, bringing some folks together, be it panels, workshops, or whatever, Simpatico's there to have those kind of conversations. So.
Yeah, I would love that. I think sort of, finding bridges between the silos is really important. So a platform like this would be perfect to do that.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to close this out, and just stick around, and we'll get into just chatting. But this has been great, Lindsay. Great been chatting with you. It's awesome.
Okay. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, so I just have to officially close out the episode, so that's what we'll have for you. That was great, and yeah, really serious about it because I think I didn't realize it was it came out through the interview. It's just even this internal group that you're doing. That's interesting stuff, and people can learn from that. I don't know how much you want that to kind of be off the record because you're just kind of conversing internally, but at the same time, I bet other groups and individuals would love to see how that process unfolds.
Oh yeah, I think at one point I just realized, I will never be able to find the stuff that they know exists because they're in treatment or they're in, fields. And it really is part of, I think there's a couple of things. So it's about bringing in different perspectives from across the organization. It's also, interestingly, it's a lot of younger, more sort of entry level people in the organization who are excited about this and want to be involved. So it's an opportunity for training for those people to get kind of their hands in something new, which is really great. It's also a way to sort of capture employee knowledge. We have a lot of employees who are approaching retirement age. And one of our first goals is really sort of picking their brains for like, hey, do you remember if that's ever flooded before? Because, maybe it's in a floodplain, but it's actually never flooded before. Like, but they would know, okay, yeah, I did. I saw the water almost got to the pump station, but that little hill there actually keeps it from flooding. And so, we need to do something. They know all of that. They've been working with these pump stations, with these assets for 20, 30 years. So we're trying to ask them a lot of questions and sort of take the oral history of our system. And that's one of the things that the group is working on. I think it's really important and really exciting. So I'm definitely ready to share some of our work as we keep going. We've only had one meeting so far, so we're brand new, but I think it's going to be fun.
Oral history of flooding. That would be great.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you go to these commission meetings too, and North Carolina is I'm lived in Georgia, I've lived in Florida. I kind of probably realize what the local politics can be like. Is it ever a controversial issue when you're bringing up these subjects just internally, and then you probably engage with the public quite a bit? Are people pushing back in any way? Does that come up?
I've only been with the authority for a little over 3 years, but since I've been here, I have only like heard good things about the work that we're doing. I mean, people, when they find out that my department exists, they're excited. They're like, wow, I didn't know you guys were even thinking about that. That's awesome. Our board did start, like, so there's the overall board, and they sort of divide into committees, and they recently started a sustainability committee. So that committee is dedicated to looking at things like climate change or, also social sustainability, that sort of stuff. So they're, of course, all very excited about the work and giving us just, I don't know, a lot of confidence to move forward and really good guidance. And then, when we've gone to the board, I've been very lucky. They're very supportive of our work, and they trust us to do a lot of exciting things. And so, it's been really, really great. It's no pushback so far.
Is there something like an association of North Carolina water utilities? Is that a thing? I mean, is there any way that you're interfacing with these other utilities in North Carolina?
Yeah, so there's the North Carolina chapter of the American Water Works Association, and which certainly like a lot of our engineers are very involved in, and they think a lot about resiliency, sort of design standards, that sort of thing. I'm not opposed to just like straight up cold calling other utilities. Like, hey, like, are you guys collecting this data? If you do, like, do you want to swap? Do you want to share? We try to find similar utilities, so for example, because we're coastal and we have so many pump stations, our energy use is pretty high compared to like in Asheville, where they don't have pump stations because they use gravity to move wastewater. And we don't have we don't have that luxury here since we have like no slope. So we want to find other utilities where we can really benchmark ourselves. So like if you're another utility and you also have a lot of pump stations, that would help us understand, like, are we doing good? Are we doing bad? Where can we improve? So, thinking like maybe Charleston, Myrtle Beach, maybe some utilities in Texas, and trying to see, hey, like, are you guys collecting this? And if so, do you want to get together and talk about it? So I think that'll be something we do in the future too. I've never been, no one's ever yelled at me for calling them. So far, I think I'll keep trying.
What are you doing?
Yeah, right.
I don't know if I grew up in Florida and lived there even after I left. We had these water management districts. Are you at all familiar with the Florida water scene in Florida?
No, not with Florida, but I've heard about the management districts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, and I think there's like five or six. So there's not like by watershed or just city or whatever. And so some of them are all powerful, like the South Florida Water Management District, which services like Miami, but then also like the sugarcane, and it just it can be so controversial. But then what I guess why I bring it up too is like I lived in Tallahassee for a while in the Water Management District up there. The population is much smaller and it's just more rural, and so the diversity of like even topics that they cover, like your shop is something great. It's a sign that you're looking ahead, whereas the South Florida Water Management District, they're like the staffing is huge and all that. So anyway, it's kind of funny how water's managed
Well,
across the US.
I feel like the trend, even in North Carolina, they've kind of started talking about like regionalizing a little bit because you do get like sort of that economy of scale, right? So, and there are a lot of rural water utilities where, young people are moving out and they're not coming back to those small towns and they're having trouble like funding the system. And just aside from climate change, the water industry already has a lot of challenges, right? So like we as a nation, we have a lot of aging infrastructure. That's going to cost a lot of money to upgrade that. We're having source water problems that people are having to like upgrade their treatment plants and deal with that. And so that's a lot for smaller water utilities to take on, never mind, hiring people like, my department and thinking about investing in other things as well. So I think it's interesting, as we see the regionalization topic come up, like some of these water management boards, the benefits, but then also like, do you lose some of the closeness to the communities and understanding, getting a feel for what the community wants. But I think that's an ongoing conversation in the water industry. So we'll kind of see what happens
All right,
as it goes on.
I'm sorry. A question from Ken, who's CEO of
Yeah.
Simpatico, is: are there any specific policies that would be of interest to you if we covered in depth here?
Policies. So I think so we talk a lot about flooding, of course, but I'm actually really interested in extreme heat. We have a lot of employees who are out in the field and obviously it gets very hot and very humid in Wilmington. And I am interested in kind of, especially maybe like with the Western states. I mean, they don't have the humidity necessarily, but what is the future going to be like OSHA? How are they going to start treating some of these extreme heat? What are they going to start sort of asking employers to do to make sure that employees are safe in the field? So I'm really interested in that conversation. I know they've kind of started talking about it with like the local football associations, like regarding practices and stuff. So I'm interested in that. I'm also really interested in sort of the economics of ratepayer geography. So, what's going to happen with mortgage if the 30-year mortgage becomes more difficult to get, how does that translate into like the tax base, the rate base, that kind of thing. So, how like financial policy is like at banks. I'm really interested in that. That would be really helpful, I think, to help us understand if your mortgage starts, if you're not able to get one, what will you do? And will that be for like a whole community or just like in pockets of neighborhoods? So I'm interested in like the financial institutions' response to climate change, how that affects like bond ratings, all of it.
Did you listen to that Jesse Keenan episode where you talked about 30-year mortgage on the podcast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could flip the whole notion of that. So yeah.
Yeah. And and now I'm starting to see a lot of like Moody's, has said that they're going to take to account climate change adaptation when they look at a city's rating for like when they issue bonds and things like that. So increasingly we're starting to realize we're going to have to tell people what we're doing for climate change. And that's going to impact, the interest rate that we pay on giant loans. That's going to impact whether we can get a loan. And so I think I'm really interested in those financial policies and how that world is going to react to some of the changes that are happening, especially in coastal cities.
We haven't done extreme heat much, and I just attended Lad Keith. I don't know if that name rings a bell. He's at the University of Arizona, but he does extreme heat. He's an urban planner, but they had a workshop just a couple weeks ago they invited me to, and I was out of my depth. I was just what these guys were talking all these GIS approaches and such. But we really do need to cover it more here on Simpatico because, again, the more people are dying from extreme heat than they are from sea level rise, from drought in all these areas, and so it doesn't get enough attention. So yeah, that's a good point that we need to refocus.
And I do think, especially for like the critical industries like water, if it's super hot outside, and then we have like a main break or like an SSO, if we have to do that, right? Like we can't just be like, oh, like not today, it needs to be like at that moment. And what does that mean when it's super hot outside? Are we gonna need to hire more people to like, put some in a cooling station to like, how is it gonna work? And I think about that a lot. Because I just think sometimes like, well, they'll drink water and they'll be fine. Like it might not be that simple on some of these days in August anymore. So yeah, I would love for more talk on that and how it affects employees like specifically.
I live in Tucson, so it gets pretty hot here. Like,
Yeah.
and Phoenix gets even hotter, if you can imagine. And Phoenix is, I think, doing some really innovative things regarding like planning and trying to think about how you're going to cool these areas. And you get into things, it's hard to plant trees here, but they do. But then the idea of like it's not native trees, but does the fact that its cooling effect outweigh the concerns about native plants being planted and such? And so it just kind of throws a lot of the traditional, I guess, patterns of adaptation on its head when you're just really kind of dealing more immediately with these impacts. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course it's like, okay, if you're building a network of like cooling stations around town or something, like all of those have to be obviously powered by something. And then you're like increasing your energy use, and so like, is there a space for like clean energy, or how do you sort of balance like these immediate short-term needs that like have to be powered by stuff with like trying to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions? And how do we sort of balance when is something so important that it's fine that it's powered by like a diesel generator, and when should you try your best to do it with clean energy? So I think that's we didn't talk about that a lot about like the mitigation work that we do, but I think those are a lot of the balances people are having to figure out, what comes first, like resiliency or like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and how do you hopefully do those at the same time? But it's not always possible.
I had a conversation with someone from the Cato Institute, free market think tank, and
Yeah.
we were talking about the heat wave in France back in 2003, where 15,000 people died. It was just this catastrophic thing, and so his recommendation, and he says this is what's going to happen, and it's true. It's just like, well, they're going to adapt by adding air conditioning too, because Paris and those places don't traditionally have air conditioning like we do in the United States. And you're right, that's an immediate kind of adaptation action, but you're like, come on, Cato, you're just throwing, gas on the fire in the long term, right? So, but
Yeah.
but people's well-being and, their immediate, their lives are at stake. So we will, I think, probably take those shortcuts at first, because that, I don't disagree with that. If you need to put in AC to how people to survive their summer, that's going to be a short-term solution. Hopefully we can shift to renewable energy.
Yeah. And I think I feel like, so after Florence, we lost power to a lot of our assets, like commercial power. And, then generators, like, of course, have to run on fuel. And then when you're like flooded for many days at a time, you start to get concerned about how long your fuel is going to last and where you're going to get more. So that's been a big post-Florence conversation in our town of, we know that we're cut off from the rest of the world during a major storm like that. So how do we make sure we have enough fuel sort of on our island until the floodwaters recede? And, that's like a lot of the conversation is turning towards like, okay, how can we bring in clean energy? Because usually after a storm, there's a lot of sun. How can, is that possible? To what scale can we get that? And then at the same time, we're having conversations with like our local energy provider about really trying to clean up the grid and push for more clean energy, coming into the grid. So hopefully the idea is if people do have to add a bunch of air conditioning, systems, like your energy provider is already working on like, getting that to be cleaner and cleaner behind the scenes. So I'm glad that the city is working on their clean energy initiative at the same time that we're doing some of our work, because it helps to know like, okay, maybe some of these changes will be clean, just with clean electricity coming into the grid.
All right, I'm going to let you go. This has been awesome. And I
Yeah.
do want to throw out, you mentioned we didn't talk about mitigation. Look at Simpatico as a platform. Let's stay in touch. This episode will hopefully be available for you tomorrow. Please do share, plant somewhere. Hopefully this is a nice kind of primer for your utility, say, hey, learn more about our utility. Look at this. And so we certainly encourage you. And even your resilience working group, if you see a role or Simpatico, extend that offer of like, maybe we'll have a panel conversation on here or something like that. We're doing that. So
yeah, that'd be great. We would love to. I think it's a great platform that you guys are building. I'm really excited to kind of keep watching it grow and to be a part of it. So thanks for having me.
And I just got to ask, I see your Twitter handle. They have it as a part of the scene collection here. You have Lens with a Z. Well,
yeah.
What is it?
I think Lindsay, well, first of all, I'm like not even that active on Twitter. I should be, but it's just like I can't handle all the social media accounts. I think like Lindsay's must have been taken or something.
Okay, so but you do you do it? Do you put a Z when you're doing short?
No,
names?
no,
okay.
no. Just like one of those Twitter weirdnesses.
I think I told you my wife's name is Lindsay with an E, and so everyone for short calls her Linz, and it never occurred to me even as I visualized it. Oh, there's a Z there, so I saw yours. I'm like, oh, is that how you kind of write your name? But it's not. So.
No, it was just like I was like, oh, hey, hello, Twitter world. Like, and then it was like, what? There's another Lindsay Halleck out there? How many could there be? But enough that I had to use Linz. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Lindsay. This has been fabulous, and we will just stay in touch.
Okay, that sounds good.
You can just sign out of Zoom, but we'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye, guys.
Hey, everyone. Fantastic conversation with Lindsay. I think that is what we're going to be doing for today. It is what we're doing for today. I just want to throw out tomorrow. We have Toby Vernon doing agroforestry at 10 a.m. Pacific, so 1 p.m. Eastern. Then I'm going to be talking with Seth Schultz and Tom Lewis, Resilient Shift. That's going to be an awesome conversation. And then sustainability with Lee Ball from Appalachian State. And then Climate EDU comes back with Kayla, and she's going to be this. I forgot if this is the third or fourth episode with Jeff Shigelmilch. Thank you. Sorry, Jeff. Probably mispronouncing that. So full day tomorrow. Definitely check it out, and we will see you later.